Welcome, good morning. Good that you're all here. So today we're going to talk about a quite important topic on PON, the interoperability, and the challenges that we see, and that we also see at our customers, the operators and the service providers. And if we start with point-to-point networks, because what we see in history, quite a lot of networks out there, mainly in Western and Northern Europe, were based on point-to-point networks. And at that time, life was quite easy, you could say. Because on the access side, you had one OLT, and then you have a separate fiber to every home. So in that case, this picture looks quite simple, and life is also quite easy, you could say. If you look at the data flows, for instance, on every fiber, you have the downstream, which goes to one household, and from that household, you have the upstream, which goes via the same fiber all the way to back to the OLT. And in that case, every household has its own fiber, so also meaning, yeah, life is quite easy. However, what we also see in the recent years is that PON is growing quite hard if you look at fiber to the home. So here's a graph where you see the division between, it's a bit small maybe, but the green one is the point-to-point Ethernet connections, the rollout, and the blue one is PON. And there you can see 2019, just a couple years back, it was about 50-50. You had 50% of the networks were rolled out based on point-to-point Ethernet, and the other half was rolled out based on PON networks. If you look nowadays, that is the middle of the graph. There you see already PON is growing quite fast. But if you look a little bit further ahead in 2026, there we see that the expectation is that more than 3/4 of the networks will be based on PON. So what does this mean? Because life was quite easy based on point-to-point. But what happens if we move more and more to PON networks? So this picture again, point-to-point. Let's compare this now with a PON network. And there we see a subtle difference because the main key aspect, you could say, of a PON network is that there is a splitter in between, meaning every household will share one feeder fiber of the OLT with different households, so typically 16, 32, or 64, based on the size of the splitter ratio. And what we see then is on the downstream side, the basics are still the same. So you have the downstream all the way from the OLT to every household. Every household receives all the data, but of course only gets its own data, so it's encrypted on the PON, and it can decrypt only its own data. In the upstream direction, it gets more complex because of the splitter. Not every household can send his packages at the same time back to the OLT. So there we need to handle, we need to work with time slots. So every household gets a certain time slot to send their upstream message back to the OLT. So this also means that all the households need to share the bandwidth with one each other. And that, of course, is maybe not new to you. That's still quite obvious, maybe. But what might be different? So what is now really the challenges that we see? How does it really work in practice? And if you compare to point-to-point, if you go to a media store and you buy some equipment and you connect it to a fiber modem on point-to-point, it will probably work. So no real issues out there. And then you could think, why not the same on PON? Because this PON is standardized, right? You have all those standards out there. You've the ITU-T, the standards body organization. They have quite a lot of standards out there describing how the communication on GPON should work, how it should work on XGS-PON. We have the OpenCI, so the management interface between the OLTs and the ONTs. So that is all well described in standards. In addition, we also have a conformance test from the Broadband Forum. So we have the technical report 247. So you might think, yeah, there are many standards out there. So yeah, this should work, right? So I can just buy a router, connect it to a modem, and it will work. However, and unfortunately, that is not always the case in PON. So what we see in practice, that there are some things, yeah, you could say, lurking below the surface. Because what we see in practice is that we have some vendor-specific managed entities, shortly MEs. And there we see that different OT vendors are interpreting the OMCI in a little bit different way. So yeah, there is a kind of language, the OMCI, but there is still some room to interpret it in multiple ways. And it's also what we see happening in practice, that different OT vendors just apply it in some different ways. So that's one. And we also have different versions of the software. So we also see the behavior of different software versions can impact also the interop between the OT and the ONT. And lastly, we see also some lock-in tactics of some OT vendors. So this depends a bit on the OT vendors. Some are really open and cooperate, some are more closed. And the lock-in tactics are mostly in the commercial area. So they of course they want to sell the whole package. They want to sell the combination of the OLT and the ONT. And then they say, yeah, it's easier because then we can ensure the interop because it's all in the same company, in the same brand. Which might have some advantages indeed, but it also has some risks involved, of course. Yeah, so that's what we on top of the iceberg. You could think the standards, but what we see in practice, yeah, it's not always that easy, and there is no guarantee based on these standards that PON equipment will work well together. So let's start now at this nice village. So let's say we want to start a fiber rollout in this nice little village over here. Very nice place, by the way. So let's say in the future we want to connect this to fiber. And one of the first things you might want to choose, as what we typically see, is that operators look at the OLT. So which OLT do they want to use in the network? So let's call this choice brand A. We choose for brand A here for the OLT. So all fine. And then we start to deploy also the ONTs in this city, also based on ONT of brand A. So everything based on the same brand, and then probably everything will work fine. But now let's say you're not happy anymore with the OLT brand, and that can have many reasons. Nowadays, of course, supply chain is a big challenge. So maybe there is a supply chain issue with the current OLT vendor. That could be a reason. Maybe you're not happy anymore with the features. Maybe you are missing things on the roadmap. Maybe the price is not good enough anymore. So there can be many reasons to look for an alternative OLT brand. So let's say you will do that, and then you end up with this situation. So we have OLT brand B, and we have ONTs in the field with brand A. So the big question is, will the deployment still work? And you may recognize this in your own deployment. This is a risk, right? Because yeah, you changed vendor, you changed chip, maybe the chip platform, you changed the software. So yeah, will this still work in a PON deployment? And if you look, how could this work? There are some preconditions for the OLT-ONT interoperability to ensure that this in the end can work. And that's, yeah, we can define, let's call it 3 different steps. So firstly, you typically look at the OLT compliancy, and that is quite standard, I would say. So the OLT should comply to all the standards out there from the ITU-T. So based on GPON or XGS-PON, and then of course the OMCI for the management. And then we have some additional guidelines, so to say. You have the TR 158. Which can also help to guarantee a good compliancy for the OLT, so that it fulfills all the standards based on PON. Secondly, there's the ONT compliancy. So there the same standards apply. And in addition, there is also an additional step, you could say. So there is a test plan, the test plan 247, which also has an official certification from the Broadband Forum. So it's referring to the BBF 247. And via that way, I will explain that a little bit more in one of the next slides. But that is an extra step to provide some baselines for the interoperability. And thirdly, there is also, which is maybe the most important step, by the way, there is also an end-to-end verification needed between the OLT and the ONT. So there, of course, we have the OMCI, the main language between the OLT and the ONT. We have TR255, which also describes the way, it checks if all the devices in the network operate to the right standards. But then what we also see, and that is what I explained in the previous slide, we also see some vendor-specific managed entities, for instance, and different software versions. And that you can refer to kind of a dialect. So every OLT has its own kind of dialect. So it interprets the OMCI in just a little bit different way. And that's also what you face in deployments. And finally, we also just need some custom interop efforts. So we always have an end-to-end solution in the PON interop. And every deployment we see in practice is different from one of the other. So there's always some custom work needed to get the full interop working. So I was talking about the BBF 247 certification. So you might have heard about that already. So this is from the Broadband Forum. It's quite big standards organization to ensure we have a lot of standards in our industry that all vendors could apply to. And in this case, it's an ONT conformance test plan with a special focus on the ONT configuration, so the OMCI, and also with a lot of focus on the QoS, the quality of service. To test conformance to the TR156, and that are basically the most critical standards for interoperable implementations. And these tests include the verification of the conformance of not only GPON but also XGPON, XGS-PON, and the equipment functionality and the implementation of the OMCI. So there are labs who can do the full certification process. So where you bring your devices to a lab, they check if everything complies to the guidelines, and then in the end, if your software and hardware complies to the full rules, you can get the official certification from the Broadband Forum. And what does this bring? So this brings this paves a little bit the way to integration and interoperability. So I could say it's quite an important step. But at the same time, it does not ensure a working interop. So that's also what I sometimes hear from customers or end users. They say, okay, so you have this certification, so that it means it will always work. That is unfortunately not the case. So it's an important precondition, I would say. But having the certification does not mean you have a successful PON interop. Because there are still the different dialects out there and the different deployment scenarios with different configurations. So you could say, you can compare it a little bit. I already mentioned it a bit. You can compare it a bit with a language. So the OMCI here is the language. And if you compare it to the country where I live, in the Netherlands, we have our own dictionary where we speak Dutch. So everyone in the Netherlands can speak Dutch. But at the same time, in reality, we also have many dialects out there. So if you live in the south of the Netherlands, for instance, compared to the upper part, it can be a challenge sometimes if they speak dialects to understand each other. So we have one language, we can all talk together, but sometimes it's a little bit different to understand each other. And that is actually the same thing what we see here in PON. So we have the standards from the ITUT, the OMCI, that is kind of like the dictionary, but in reality, each OLT speaks a different dialect. And yeah, the thing is to understand the complete language. You of course need also to understand each dialect, because otherwise it will still be challenging if you travel across the Netherlands to talk with anyone in a good way. So that's the challenge also you see in the picture. If you have one OLT, we have different OLTs in the field, how to deal with this and how to speak all those different dialects. And that is a challenge we took at Genexis already for a long time. So you could say this is our real core value that we can provide to our customers. We can provide this dialect dictionary, you could say. So based on, for instance, the Fiber Twist, one of the product lines, we have a software version which no matter what dialect the OLT speaks, it will automatically detect which dialect it is and adapts accordingly. So it means, hey, if you have OLT from brand A, the Fiber Twist with the software will detect, okay, this is brand A, I need to speak that dialect. And if you add another OLT or if you replace it for another brand, it can also automatically detect and adapt its dialect. And that dialect dictionary we call interop. So with our software platform interop, we provide an independent interop. So as said, it automatically detects the dialect on the other side and adapts as needed. And the nice thing is also that this comes pre-installed on all Fiber Twist. So this means we have one firmware to serve all of our different PON deployments and different customers. So yeah, it doesn't mean you need different firmware versions for different deployments, which of course has the disadvantage if you have multiple versions in your van. Then the installer needs to check which product and which software version do I need to get it working. But with the Fiber Twist, it's very easy. You have one firmware version and it will work with any OLT. And with interop, we are maintaining interop in more than 100 networks currently. So yeah, already quite some experience in the field, I would say. And if you also look here at a quote of one of our customers, so this is from DNSNet. It's a large operator in the area of Berlin in Germany. And there they also find it very easy. Yeah? They don't have the worries anymore to change different PON ONTs in the field. And also they don't have a dependency on the OLT vendor and the OLT brand. So they stay Genexis is interoperable with the OLT vendors we currently use and all the major ones in the market. And yeah, in the end, they don't not even have to think which OLT sits behind the connection in the field. So that's what we really want to aim for with interop. And it's also a little bit what we believe. We want to be open and independent. So we don't want to lock in our customers in some way. So our aim is also to avoid a vendor lock-in in a PON deployment, because in the end we don't think that it's the best thing for the customer, but also not for us. So therefore we want to be open. So interoperable, of course, you need to be for that. You need to be open and flexible. We can support this with a wide PON portfolio. To suit every different need in terms of products, because also on the product side, of course, you can have different needs, for instance, for voice ports, CTV ports, one port, multiple ports, etc. And what's also very important is to be future-proof, meaning you can, in the future, easily upgrade your network. So this is also supported all by the Fiber Twist concept and also via the software which is delivered together with that. And then, that was already quite a complex story maybe. So we started with Pointtopoint and there not too much explanation was needed. PON is already a bit more complex because we need to deal with the interop. And then as a side story here, I wanted to add some additional complexity, which we see in some countries. Because, for instance, in Germany, Finland, Italy, Austria, and the Netherlands, they have chosen or they are considering to go for a free modem choice. So meaning, what does it mean? if you look at the picture, yeah, you can the organizations or the governments can decide where the demarcation point should be. So should it be for the modem, should it be for the router, or should it after the router, before the end equipment? And what we see in these countries is that they are that they're considering, or they have chosen for the decoupling point at point A in this picture, so meaning just where the fiber enters, and even before the modem for the network termination point, ONT. And in point-to-point, this could be quite easy, because then everything is pretty much standardized. You can just connect any modem, any router, and it will most likely work. But as we have seen in PON deployments, this is typically not the case, and because it requires those certifications, the interop efforts. So this brings an additional challenges for these countries where they have the free modem choice at point A. So yeah, how to deal with this? This is quite, this can make life even more complicated, right? So how to deal with this? I want to start with, we at Genexis support the free modem choice, also the free router choice, because in the end, we see it can bring some benefits to the end user's experience. They are not limited to one device they should use, but they can go to the full open market and look for a device they want to have, which benefits them best. And it especially works well for point-to-point deployments. But yeah, because of, as explained, with all the dialects and the interop efforts in PON, it is a challenge. We also see at our customers, the operators and the service providers. And it's not it's not only about the PON deployments. So it's also for the network stability and security. It also is a point, of course, to consider. If anyone can just go to the local media shop and buy a modem, how is it secured? Will it provide a stable network solution? How will the quality of service be ensured, etc.? And we see the entry of PON modems can be managed, for instance, via requiring the BBF 247 compliancy. So that can be one manner of dealing with this challenge. With this challenge. So that's also why in the last quarter we have officially certified a couple of our products based on the BBF 247 for XGS-PON. And we see also this provides some value for our customers, that they can have a stamp on it in this case. So you limit a little bit the free modem choice. You can say, okay, you can choose whatever you want. However, it needs to fulfill some standards from the industry. And then the operators or service providers can refer to this broadband form standard and certification. There are some more ways. I will not explain them in this webinar right now. If you want to have more information on this, how to deal with this, then please contact us and we can have further talks. But yeah, just to explain a little bit that this can add some additional complexity to the PON challenge. So now we talked a lot about the interoperability about PON, and it's quite complex, okay. But in the end, of course, we can manage it. So the question now is how to reach it. The process we have at Genexis, how to reach it. So we have a PON interop program based on the different OLTs and the software platforms. And because of our experience in more than 100 networks, our software already has a wide coverage of many different deployments. So that also means if you have a, you could say a basic deployment scenario with not too extreme configurations, then typically we can achieve a plug-and-play interop. So mean you get a sample of the fiber twist of one of our products, you test it in your lab, and you have a good chance that it will work out of the box. So in that case, the workflow is really easy. You get a sample of us with the initial software, you do your lab test, and then you have the software approval for mass deployment. So then life is already quite simple. And in some cases, of course, if you do not have a basic deployment scenarios, if you have some alternative configurations, which is a little bit more complex, and you're going to test it, we're going to test it in our lab. Let's say we found some issues. Then we also have a process in place to resolve those interop issues. So the way it looks then, so you do your testing, you report your interop issues to our support team. They will investigate what is the issue, what is the root cause, and then if they've found it, it will be processed to our development team. And once the interop issue is clear, then it's quite often it's relatively easy to solve the issue. So with that, we will provide a new software release to test at the customer lab. We will also verify it in our own lab. And if then all fine, we can move to an official release, and we can simply go to the next step. Again, to the software approval for mass deployment. And if we look at the timing, so the first part, which I just described, from lab test to investigation, providing a first patch, that typically takes about 1 month. Of course, depends a bit on the deployment scenario, on the complexity. But yeah, you can say on average in a typical interop issue, it will take about 1 month. And then in the final phase, from the first software patch to the approval for the interop software, that also typically takes about 1 month. Of course, here also depending on the complexity, etc. So then still, we have some extra steps when interop issues are found, but then still in the end, we have a path all the way to a successful interop. Then a little bit more about Genexis. So how do we do all of this? As said, we have already a wide experience. So we are doing this since 2013. And there we are maintaining an independent PON interop in more than 100 networks. So it's a little bit of slogan, successful interop anywhere, anytime, and via a single firmware image. So as I said, we have one firmware image just for deploying all these different types of networks. And also to achieve this, we have all the main OLTs in our own lab. So all the common brands in Europe and also a little bit outside of Europe. We have in our own lab. So meaning if interop issues are there, we can reproduce the issue in our own lab based on that same OLT and mostly also the same line card, because the line card is also quite important for the interop. We are active member also in the broadband forum and one of the councils, where we drive the next gen PON developments. And going back to our lab, we have enhanced test capabilities. So we have professional tools like GPON, XGS-PON, analyzers, OLT emulators. We follow the TR247 test cases for all of our products. And on top then we provide also the customer specific test cases. So if there is an interop issue, we can really simulate the network environment of the customer in our own lab so that we can do the deep dive on all the interop issues to try to find the root cause and to solve it. And finally, what's also important is because to stress, we take the lead in analyzing the interop. So if there is any interop issue, our customers come to us. We will do the analysis on finding the root cause, and we will provide a patch if the issue is, of course, in the ONT. But anyway, we will take the lead in the investigation. And mostly we can then solve the interop issue ourselves within our own PON teams. But you can imagine sometimes we need also help from the SOC vendor, for instance, from the chipset vendor. And in rare cases also from the OLT vendor. This is also supported, so we have three-party communication in place with all the main OLT vendors. So if needed, we also have backup support from those parties. And you see also the logo. Actually last week we got a formal certification from the Broadband Forum 247, also for our FiberTest product now. In a minute I will also show the portfolio, but it's something we also have achieved now in the portfolio. Indeed, talking about the portfolio, let's have a look at what we currently have based on GPON and XGS-PON to provide you some view on what products we can offer. So starting with GPON, so we have the FiberTwist G2000 series here, and there we have some different flavors. So we have one-port models. So we have one port only, meaning a 1 gig GPON ONT. And what we now also are adding to the portfolio is also one port GPON ONT, but then with a 2.5 gig LAN port. So also there we see some need from customers to kind of an intermediate step between GPON and XGS-PON to make the step from a 1 gig LAN port to a 2.5 gig LAN port while still staying on the mainstream GPON technology. So that's also an option that could be considered. On one port, we also offer an option for CTV, and then we also have multiple 4-port GPON ONTs, so 4-port only, and there are also the option for adding RF overlay. And then last year, we heavily invested in our XGS-PON portfolio. So also here many flavors, even a little bit more, because also here we can play a little bit with the LAN speeds. So in XGS-PON, we have 1-port models available. And then in the 1-port, we have the option for a 2.5 gig LAN port and also a 10 gig LAN port. So on the second line, you see a 1-port 10 gig XGS-PON ONT. And in the first line, you see 1 port with 2.5 gig LAN ports. And there also we have the options for voice, CTV, and also CTV with special filters. Then we have multi-port ONTs. So the XGS2310B offers one 10 gig port with two 1 gig Ethernet LAN ports. And finally, at the bottom row, we have a full 4-port XGS-PON ONTs. And there you see a little bit bigger form factor, so that it's still based on the same FiberTwist concept. So you can still twist it on the FiberTwist FTU. But there, because of space and thermal reasons, we needed to move to a little bit bigger housing. So it's same concept, just a little bit bigger housing. And there we have enough space to offer 4 ports in total, so of which one 10 gig, and then also here options for voice and CTV. So that brings me to the conclusion. So we talked about PON interop and the complexity. So we started with point-to-point, where everything is quite relaxed and easy. But we see the market is moving more and more to PON networks, especially when you're moving to 10 gig solutions. And in PON, interoperability is important, because without it, it will probably not work if you connect the different devices together. So it's not a given, unfortunately. And yeah, we have some guidelines. There are standards and test plans available, but this does not ensure a working interop. So there's a challenge. An additional challenge is that we have different OLTs with different dialects. To overcome this, to achieve a successful interop, one of the preconditions, one of the steps you could consider is to look for products which are BBF 247 certified. So that's already sets a ground level and paves the way for integration and interoperability in a PON network. Speaking all the different dialects of all the different OLTs is another important step, because otherwise, you could be locked into one OLT brand solution. And finally, the last essential step is to provide a custom end-to-end solution, because every network is different and it always requires some custom end-to-end solutions. And with Genexis IntroOS, we provide let's call it a dialect dictionary, where we speak all those different dialects and where it automatically adapts all via the same firmware. And via a wide PON portfolio, there is a product for every deployment out there. And that brings me to the end of this presentation. So I would like to thank you for your attention.